Hello, everyone, and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, as the case may be. It's really good to have you all here again for the first session in our 2026 program of the IOI Alumni Professional Development Seminar Series, Webinar Series. So again, as I said, it's really a pleasure to welcome you to this session and briefly introduce what the whole point of these sessions and these webinars are about. It's part of our broader outreach to our alumni, people who have graduated from the global program of IOI training courses, but also these seminars and webinars are open to people who are interested, people usually from the early career ocean professionals kind of background. And through these seminars and webinars, we aim to continue supporting professional development well beyond the end either of the training program or as your career progresses. Since the IOI has been offering professional training programs on ocean governance, we have more than 2,500 practitioners and alumni worldwide. And this series is one way we support and reach out and maintain this community of practice. Through these quarterly webinars, therefore, we try and bring together experts to speak on topics which I find are very of the moment. And we also like to offer a format where after the experts speak, our audience, yourselves, can engage with the latest developments, ask questions, and we encourage exchange, we encourage reflection, and we encourage continued learning. So we're very pleased to see so many people join us today, and we hope that this session will both offer practical insights as well as a space for discussion in order to help us manage more efficiently our session. I would very much like to invite you and to ask you to place your questions in the Q&A box. Your moderator, Cosmin, and I, Antonella Vassallo from headquarters, will be looking through the Q&A box as well as the chat to collate your questions so that the moderator can address them to the right expert to answer your questions. So thank you again for being here. I wish you an enjoyable and interesting session today, and we look forward to having your questions in the chat. So thank you very much. And with these few words, I introduce my colleague, Cosmin. Many of you know him. He is not only an alumnus of the IOI himself, but he's also responsible for implementing this program. So Cosmin, our moderator, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Antonella, for the wonderful introduction. And so we start the first IOI CPD webinar of 2026. We would like to believe that this one comes at a particularly consequential moment in time. Of course, with the entry into force of the BBNJ Agreement earlier this year, global ocean governance has entered a new phase, one which finally shifts from negotiation to implementation. So today, rather than looking back, we hope to very much look to the future. What does implementation actually look like in practice? What are the early opportunities? And what challenges may lie ahead? We've structured the session to guide us a little bit through this journey, of course, with the help of our expert speakers today. And we are going to start with a system-level perspective following PrepCon3, then move into how key elements of the agreement can be operationalized. And finally, we hope to ground the discussion in real-world implementation, particularly around capacity building and cross-sectoral cooperation. As Antonella was mentioning, after the speaker interventions, we'll open the floor for discussion. So please go ahead and leave your questions in the Q&A session. With that, I would like to begin by introducing our first speaker, Daniel Kachelriess, who will help us set the stage for a system-level perspective. Daniel has over a decade of experience working at the forefront of marine conservation in multilateral settings, including direct involvement in the BBNJ negotiations through the High Seas Alliance as well. His work has consistently focused on bridging policy, law, and implementation, and now in his current role coordinating cross-cutting engagement on the High Seas Treaty. Daniel will walk us through the key outcomes of PrepCom3 and offer reflections on what lies ahead for implementation beyond COP number 1, with a particular focus on marine genetic resources and enabling frameworks around them. Daniel, you may have the floor.
Thank you so much, Cosmin. And let me see if I can share my screen. So you can also see my presentation.
Lovely.
So let's try this. And first of all, thanks so much for the invitation. As Antonella said, and as you said, it is very timely. Literally just came home from PrepCom this weekend. So I will give a few overview elements of PrepCom and focus on two specific things. And then I think it will be very nicely complemented with an overview of some of the outcomes on the other issues by Klaudija. Can you see my screen now? I assume yes. Let me know if it doesn't work.
Yes, all good, Daniel. Super.
So first of all, why did parties, after the treaty was agreed in June 2023, decide to establish a PrepCom through the General Assembly Resolution 78-72? One of the reasons is that when the BBNJ agreement was negotiated, parties left quite a few details open to be further determined, and a lot of that was around the institutional arrangements, the sort of the foundation for implementation. And the PrepCom's main focus was to develop recommendations for COP1 to adopt in order to flesh out those institutions that are established in the agreement, mostly established in the agreement. So this is a table just giving you an overview of the different bits and pieces that make up the institutional framework of the BBNJ agreement. There's the Conference of Parties, the major decision-making body. The treaty established that it has to meet within 1 year after entry into force. And now, very excitingly, we have the dates for the first COP, 11 to 22 January 2027. But things that were not determined were, for example, the frequency of meetings and the COP rules of procedure. The treaty also establishes a secretariat that manages the clearinghouse mechanism, DUALOS, that many of you will know, Divisions of Oceans and of the Sea of the Office of Legal Affairs in New York, is the interim secretariat, but again, the hosting arrangements for the secretariat and how it will work exactly remains to be determined. One of the functions of the secretariat is managing the clearinghouse mechanism, which has been described as the central nervous system of the agreement for information exchange. It is primarily an open access platform for sharing information, but again, the specific modalities for it are to be determined by COP, and I'll go a little bit into the timeline for this later. And then there are a number of subsidiary bodies, the scientific and technical body, again, size terms of reference modalities were not determined. Access and Benefit Sharing Committee, which is responsible for overseeing implementation of Part 2, the Marine Genetic Resources part of the agreement, the Capacity Building and Transfer Marine Technology Committee, and the Implementation and Compliance Committee. And all of them had numerous elements not determined. In fact, the only one that had its size set already in the agreement is the Access and Benefit Sharing Committee. I omitted the Finance Committee because it's not even established in the agreement itself, contrary to the other bodies. But still, there's a lot of things that were open with regard to the Finance Committee. So the first meeting of the PrepCom was an organizational meeting where the PrepCom discussed its own program of work. And the co-chairs afterwards in their report set out 3 main clusters. The first one is governance, which has COP rules of procedure, terms of reference and modalities of subsidiary bodies, including the selection of their members, the secretariat arrangements, but then also an initial discussion around reporting requirements in the agreement. And also parties felt it might be helpful to discuss cooperation with relevant instruments, frameworks, and bodies, so the external cooperation part. Cluster 2 is around the clearinghouse mechanism, and then cluster 3 are all of the financial issues, including financial rules, the voluntary trust fund to support developing country parties, delegates to attend meetings of the BBNJ Agreement, the Global Environment Facility Trust Fund, and the Special Fund. And I believe Klaudija will cover the outcomes for those in her presentation. So I will take us down one particular route. One thing that was quite important from the beginning for HICIS Alliance, but also for a lot of stakeholders and parties, and that is the clearinghouse mechanism, because as I mentioned, it is the primary means for information exchange established in the agreement. It serves as a centralized platform to access, provide, and disseminate information relating to marine genetic resources, environmental impact assessments, and capacity building and transfer technology. It does not have a specified role in the area-based management tool part of the agreement, but parties, and you'll hear about that later, have decided that they do want the clearinghouse mechanism to also play a central role there. It plays an important role for transparency and to facilitate international cooperation and collaboration. So in the context of MGRs, for example, it receives the notifications according to Article 12, pre-collection, post-collection, and utilization. Note that in the slide I have cruise, which isn't technically correct. It's pre-collection and post-collection, with the granularity of that still to be determined. It creates, once receiving the pre-collection notification, a BBNJ batch identifier that is then used for what is called the lightweight monitoring system of the BBNJ Agreement to follow that information across the chain of custody. And then it serves as a basis for monitoring of the implementation of that agreement. In the context of environmental impact assessments, again, it is to facilitate information sharing, and it enables parties to fulfill their notification obligations under various provisions. So, for example, notifying a screening decision, or when the screening confirms that a full EIA is required, the full EIA, or when the EIA is conducted under another relevant instrument, framework, and body, then making that EIA available. And there's also a need for automatic notifications when parties' reports are uploaded. And overall, these are relatively simple information needs. In the context of capacity building and transfer of technology, there is both a function that requests for capacity building and transfer technology can be uploaded, and opportunities as well, and a function to facilitate matching of needs with support available. What's really interesting is that the capacity building and transfer technology part of the agreement is supposed to be based on capacity needs assessments, and to make sure that it's country driven. And those can either be self-assessed, or again, there can be a role for the Capacity Building and Transfer Technology Committee and the clearinghouse mechanism in helping countries in facilitating those needs assessments. And again, there's a few potential implicit roles. So with the agreement entering into force in 17 January this year, there was a bit of an issue in the sense that there are a number of information sharing obligations under the agreement, but the clearinghouse mechanism, although is legally established in the agreement, doesn't magically start to exist. That could have already been an issue with if parties had chosen provisional application. To my knowledge, no party has chosen provisional application before entry into force, but at least where we are now, BBNJ obligations are in effect, and parties are obliged to, and some want to send notifications, but nothing is in place for them to send it to. And then the specific modalities are to be determined by COP. And I should mention that in end of February this year, the Division of Oceans and Law of the Sea made interim arrangements available, consisting of sending them an email, and then they will upload the information to the BBNJ Agreement website. So now there is an interim way to submit information. But one of the things that parties tried from PrepCom 1 onwards, I would say, is to see what can be done on the clearinghouse mechanism prior to PrepCom 1. And at PrepCom 1, there was already a sort of an agreement that there is a need to do something. But for various reasons, no agreement was reached. And in PrepCom 2, parties tried to set up an ad hoc informal technical working group to work on the clearinghouse mechanism intersessionally between PrepCom 2 and PrepCom 3. And again, that failed because the composition of the group couldn't be agreed. And now finally, at PrepCom 3, there is a decision that the co-chairs of the PrepCom, in consultation with the borough and the assistance of the Secretariat, will finally get this very important piece of the BBNJ agreement outside of a conference room and get some actual developers working on this to develop an operational prototype. That should cover MGR notifications and the generation of the BBNJ standardized batch identifier, the ability to match capacity building and transfer of marine technology opportunities with interested recipients, the EIA notifications, and basic requirements for the infrastructure of ABMTs. So parties clearly making that decision that ABMT should be in it. The outcome document consists of an open call for a technical partner within a relatively short time frame to develop that prototype between now and COP1. It is very clear that it is non-prejudicial to COP1 decisions, so COP1 might decide to just chuck it aside and do something new. And there's a summary of discussions attached at the end of it that the developers should take into account. And now focusing on one other outcome of PrepCom, and that is for all of the parts, MGRs, capacity building, EIAs that I was asked to talk about, the subsidiary bodies have really important roles. And PrepCom 3 delivered on the composition of most of the subsidiary bodies. So we now know what is the size of the Access and Benefit Sharing Committee, what is the size of the scientific and technical body. The only committee that isn't fully resolved is the Finance Committee. So the size and composition of the Finance Committee is still bracketed. There are also other cross-cutting modalities that were decided. All subsidiary bodies members will serve in personal expert capacity. They can all deploy flexible meeting modalities, including virtual and intersessional work. They can form working groups. They can involve, in subcommittees, they can involve ad hoc experts, and they can cooperate with limited guidance by the COP without having to go back to COP every single time, both with each other and with external relevant instruments, frameworks, and bodies. One thing that was discussed quite a lot at the sidelines, but that wasn't solved, was how to actually elect the first tranche of members. So the way that is currently written, it will take until COP2 for them to be elected, which would lose us 1 full year of implementation. Yeah. This is how it's written. So at the moment, it's no later than 90 days before the next meeting of the Conference of the Parties. And because this modalities document will only be adopted at COP1, it can't happen before COP1 without parties specifically agreeing to apply it provisionally. And so unless other measures are taken or adopted at COP1, it will take until COP2 to set up the subsidiary bodies. I hope that was helpful and looking forward to any questions in the discussion later. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Daniel. That was quite a comprehensive overview, and thank you for setting the stage for the rest of our talk. I know it's not always easy being the first person, but you have touched on quite a few emerging issues with regards to implementation, which stemmed from PrepCom, from the PrepCom. And I'm pretty sure we're going to get a few questions your way in the Q&A session. But in the meantime, we now turn to Klaudija Cremers, who is a senior research fellow at the IDDRI, an international think tank focused on sustainable development and international cooperation, where she specializes in ocean governance with particular expertise on the BBNJ Agreement and the implementation of marine protected areas on the high seas. Basically, building on Daniel's system level overview, Klaudija will take us a little bit further into the operational dimension, looking at exactly how states and coalitions can begin preparing for implementation in the lead up to COP1, and particularly in relation to area-based management tools. Thank you very much, Klaudija. Some of you might remember Klaudija from 3 years ago when we did our introduction to the BBNJ process. So we are double happy to have a follow-up almost 3 years later. So Klaudija, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Cosmin and Antonella, for this opportunity to speak in today's webinar. And I cannot believe that it's been 3 years ago that I was speaking at the last meeting with some of you. So today I will focus on a few elements. So I will, as Cosmin said, I will focus a bit more on the ABMT chapter. But first, I will complement Daniel's presentation to say a few more words about what has happened at PrepCom 3 and what needs to happen at COP1. So then I will look into how we can fast-track implementation of the ABMT chapter to provide some suggestions on what we can already do before COP1. And then I'll provide some examples of ongoing preparations for ABMT proposals. So first, from PrepCom 3 to COP1. I know that you're all aware of the abbreviations, but don't hesitate in the chat if you don't know the abbreviation to ask for an explanation. I'm sure my colleagues can help explaining them. Maybe just to come back to the timeline of where we're at and to have the bigger picture. So as you all know, the 17th of January 2026, it was the entry into force of the BBNJ Agreement, which was very exciting because compared to other multilateral environmental agreements and especially ocean agreements, this has been quite a success for multilateralism, especially with all the geopolitical situation nowadays. Many people have been very happy to see that the entry into force of the BBNJ Agreement came relatively quickly. So as Daniel mentioned, we've had several PrepComs, and over the last 2 weeks, we've had PrepCom 3, which was supposed to be the last one of the PrepComs, the preparatory committees. And so it's also the first BBNJ meeting that took place after the entry into force of the BBNJ Agreement. So the objective of the PrepCom 3 was to provide recommendations on key institutional arrangements and practical operations to make the BBNJ Agreement operational as soon as possible. Because of course, many people also think about the 30 by 30 target, which is around the corner. So what this means in terms of expectations for the PrepCom 3 is that there was not really a formal decision that needed to be taken at this meeting. So the PrepCom made recommendations, which COP1 will then consider for adoption. So all the documents that Daniel talked about, they have been basically, there are all kinds of documents that will be sent to COP1. And I just put here a screenshot of our policy brief that we published just before the PrepCom, which I think is still relevant today. And there we provide an overview of which decisions will have to be taken at COP1 and which can be taken a bit later. So now a bit of an overview of what delegates managed to achieve at this meeting. So during PrepCom 3, delegates managed to approve draft decisions and documents on the financial mechanism of the BBNJ Agreement, including the Voluntary Trust Fund, the Special Fund, and the MOU with the Global Environmental Facility to establish the GEF Trust Fund. Daniel also mentioned the clearinghouse mechanism. So the BBNJ agreement specifies that the COP should adopt the modalities for the clearinghouse mechanism. So that's why it's important, as he mentioned, that the clearinghouse mechanism is operationalized as soon as possible. So what happened between PrepCom 2 and PrepCom 3? Maybe to complement his presentation as well. So Dualos commissioned a consultant to prepare a draft study on the technical aspects of the operationalization of the clearinghouse mechanism under the BBNJ agreement. And so during the meeting, there were several opportunities for consultation and for delegates to give their opinion on this draft study. And as Daniel mentioned, now the next step will be an operational prototype that will be looked into. So as you probably have heard, we have 3 candidates now for the seat of the Secretariat. So for a long time, it was Belgium and Chile that were the main candidates to propose or for the host of the Secretariat. And a few months ago, China also submitted their proposal. So during the PrepCom, we've had 3 events. So each country presented their proposal to host the Secretariat. And countries also talked about what the decision-making process should be to decide on which country will get the Secretariat. And delegates also approved draft decisions and documents on reporting requirements. So this has been the progress so far. However, throughout the week or throughout the 2 weeks, some of the documents were proven to be a bit more complex to find an agreement on. So there's 3 main documents basically that delegates found difficult to find consensus on. The first document is the rules of procedure of the COP. So just to say, for these documents, there's bracketed text, which means that there's no consensus on the content of the text, and it basically says option 1, option 2, and states will have to decide at COP1, hopefully, how to advance with these discussions. But it's a bit unfortunate, or that they didn't manage to agree on this at the PrepCom, of course, because now it will take time of the first COP, which is also precious because we will, of course, want to continue with the content. So regarding the rules of procedure of the COP, there were disagreements regarding voting modalities, including different thresholds for quorum. So that means like how many delegates have to be in the room, or how many state parties have to be in the room and vote to make the vote valid, and also for decision making. And delegates could also not agree on observer participation. There were especially a lot of discussions about the conditions for granting observer status. Then on the terms of reference of subsidiary bodies, this is what Daniel mentioned already. What was interesting is that during the session, a group of states proposed interim arrangements to nominate candidates for subsidiary body membership in advance of COP1, but unfortunately this was not taken up. Then on financial rules and regulations, there were different opinions on the role of the Finance Committee in the budget preparation. But as Daniel showed in his table, this was, of course, difficult because the Finance Committee has not been established yet, and because the terms of reference of the subsidiary bodies were also turned out to be controversial. So it was difficult to also agree on the financial rules and regulations. There were also some disagreements regarding the contributions to the budget. So in terms of intersessional work, because of course we're in April now and the COP1 will take place in January. So it means we have about 9 months left to prepare for COP1. So what the co-chairs have emphasized is that PrepCom's mandate ends upon conclusion of COP1. So this means that work can still be ongoing in the coming few months to prepare for COP1 and to make sure that COP1 is the most efficient possible to operationalize the BBNJ agreement. And of course, regarding the clearinghouse mechanism, since countries already have reporting obligations with the entry into force of the BBNJ agreement, this will be quite an important element as well, how this draft study that the consultant has developed, how it will be taken up. So this draft study will be finalized now after the PrepCom and will be shared with the parties. And then, of course, the question is, what will the states think about the prototype that will be developed ahead of COP1? So now I'll go more into the ABMT chapter. So how can we fast track the implementation of the ABMT chapter? And so for this, I would like to go back a bit by talking what the ABMT chapter includes. So part 3 of the BBNJ agreement establishes a specific procedure for the creation of ABMTs. So for example, yes, one state or several state parties can submit proposals to the Secretariat. So it's only state parties that can submit a proposal. Then this proposal will be evaluated by the scientific and technical body. And then there will be a process of formal consultations. And in the end, it's up to the COP to formally adopt the proposal. So as you can see in this process, we need the scientific and technical body to evaluate the proposal. That's why the establishment of the scientific and technical body is essential to enable the creation of area-based management tools, including marine protected areas. So this is why, yeah, all these, sometimes you might think that this PrepCom topics are quite technical or procedural or legal, but they're actually very important for the operationalization of the BBNJ agreement and to make sure that we can work on the content and make a difference on the water. So yeah, I hope that in the intersessional periods, there will be some more thinking about how to make sure that scientific and technical body will be operationalized as soon as possible. Then as a reminder of what proposals should include. So in proposals for ABMT should include information regarding the geographic or spatial description of the area, information on the indicated criteria, what kind of human activities are happening, the state of the marine environment and biological diversity, a description of the conservation and sustainable use objectives where appropriate, a draft management plan, the duration of the proposed area and measures, any information, any consultations that have been undertaken as part of the development of the ABMT proposal, information about any ABMTs, including MPAs that already exist in the area that are relevant, and relevant scientific inputs and where available traditional knowledge. So as you see, there's a lot of information that needs to be gathered for these proposals for ABMTs. And so what is exciting is that states and other stakeholders are already gathering this information to develop the first proposals. And it also means that we don't have to wait for the first COP to act. So this paper, or I wrote this paper, or like I was one of the co-authors of this paper together with Daniel. And I think, so we published it in 2022, but it's still very relevant. And it was Christina Gierde, who unfortunately passed away last December, who was the lead author. And so in this paper, we talked about how to fast track this implementation of the BBNJ agreement. And even though we wrote it ahead of the entry into force of the BBNJ agreement, I think that there's a lot of lessons learned that are relevant for all parts of the BBNJ agreement. So in the figure on the right, at IDDRI, we tried to, in cooperation with IUCN, we tried to summarize a bit our lessons learned or ideas regarding the fast tracking of the implementation. So of course you have the bringing the agreement into force. So now, of course, we have the entry into force. So that was actually way faster than everybody expected. So that's very positive. But there's still many states that have not ratified the BBNJ agreement or have not acceded to the agreement. So there's still some work to be done there. Also because in some areas, states have been, or sites have been identified next to states that are not party to the BBNJ agreement. So this is some work that can be done. We also expect that there will be many more states that will become party to the BBNJ agreement because now that the treaty has entered into force for COP1, it's only the state parties that can take decisions regarding the BBNJ agreement. So any states that are not party to the agreement, they basically do not have a seat at the decision-making table. Then the second element is building up the institutional mechanism. So this is something that we just mentioned regarding the PrepCom and what has already been prepared so far. And then the third element is developing capacity, science, and technology. So this is where I'll go a bit more into depth regarding ABMTs. So regarding MPAs and on other ABMTs, what we say in the paper is that other stakeholders can also already start preparing the first proposals. So as you saw in the different elements that the proposal should include, we should compile a lot of existing information, identify priorities, which sites to focus on, build support and coordinate efforts among partners and stakeholders through informal alliances. Then secondly, it's important to look at what existing management measures already exist. So of course, the BBNJ agreement should not undermine existing organizations, but also how can the BBNJ agreement complement the work of sectoral and regional management authorities, and how will this cooperation coordination work in practice? Then the third suggestion is to draw from established scientific criteria and data compilation and assessment efforts. So of course we have EPSAs and other types of scientific measures or scientific ways of identifying which sites should be protected. So this is also something to keep in mind. So for the CBD, for example, there's now a new process to update EPSAs, but what other scientific criteria should we use? How can we make sure that the sites that will be protected really focus on the sites that require protection or are in need of protection in the high seas? And then the last element is regarding MPA network design. So in the BBNJ agreement, it says that the objective is to have ecologically representative and well-connected networks of MPAs. So how can we already think about this, for example, when proposing a high seas MPA or an area-based management tool? How can we make sure that different efforts in different regions are aligned? So now a few words on the ongoing preparations for ABNT proposals. So I just kept it to a few examples, but there's many more things to say, of course. So it's quite exciting because there's many different regions that have already started thinking about ABNT proposals in many countries. And so there's also a group called the First Movers, led by Chile. And so they try to organize meetings together. So the First Movers are composed of all the states that are interested in proposing the first ABMTs or MPAs under the BBNJ agreement. And so they try to exchange lessons learned, especially regarding the proposal process, or as well regarding the consultation process. And so, yeah, they do not wait for the first COP. They've already held several meetings. Also this time at the PrepCon, there was a meeting of the First Movers, and civil society is also invited to participate and share any technical expertise. Then there's also several coalitions that have been established to create the first ABMTs. So for example, there's the Coral Reefs of the High Seas Coalition that is helping Chile with their proposal for a High Seas MPA in Salas de Gomez and Nazca Ridges, which is the high seas area around Easter Island in high seas. There's also a new project called IKI Living High Seas. They are also identified several different sites around the world to create the first ABMTs. And an interesting element as well is the regional coordination. So what we've seen so far, one of the lessons learned while working on these ABMT proposals, is that it's good to have multiple states that are working together on proposals, so that there's some kind of regional ownership. And so the ECOWAS states, they're also working on a proposal in the Canary Current and Convergence Zone, which is the high seas area. It's an EPSA off the coast of Senegal, or like in the high seas, basically. So that is also a very interesting initiative where regional efforts are used to work together and to create some kind of joint front or proposal or championship of a BBNJ proposal. Then there's also the role of science, of course. The Smith Ocean Institute, they have organized several scientific expeditions to different sites. And sometimes, or I've heard of some occasions where coalitions or, for example, civil society that are interested in making a case for the protection of a certain high seas, contact the Smith Ocean Institute to ask them, can you, for example, reroute your vessel to look at this site so that we have more scientific information about this site. And then, of course, there's the role of funders. There's several funders that have pledged money for helping states ratify, but also with the implementation of several parts of the agreements, and especially on ABMTs. So just to conclude, also to say a few words about the work that IDDRI is doing. So we've been focusing mostly on the implementation of ABMTs, or including MPAs. And what we're mostly interested in is how to implement these ABMTs on the water. So how will it work in practice? Which is something that actually is not covered very much in the BBNJ agreement. So ABMT proposals must include a draft management plan encompassing the proposed measures and outlining proposed monitoring, research, and review activities to achieve the specified objectives. That's what it says in the agreement. And so, as you've probably heard of paper parks, this can also happen in the ocean. That's so basically marine protected areas that are protected on paper but not in practice. So we expect that the effectiveness of future ABMTs will be closely scrutinized, making it essential for champion states and coalitions to anticipate implementation challenges. So this is what we've been researching for the last, I would say, 3 years, since my last presentation with you. So we've been looking into the question of monitoring, control, and surveillance. How does enforcement work on the water in these high seas MPAs? What is the role of emerging technologies? What can we say about the management costs, for example, of these high seas MPAs? Because funding is often a big problem already in national MPAs. And we've recently started a new project on the management authority. So, for example, in national MPAs, there's often a management authority responsible for the day-to-day management. But how will this work in the BBNJ context? Should there be what kind of tasks need to be done? For example, do we need some kind of staff in the BBNJ Secretariat or part of the scientific and technical body or the implementation and compliance committee? To what extent can regional organizations that already exist play a role in the day-to-day management? Or will we rely on champion states that use flag state control to patrol the vessels that are registered to them? So these are the type of questions that we're currently looking into, and I'm happy to answer some questions if you have. Thank you so much, and I'm available also by email if you want to follow up.
Thank you very much, Klaudija. Those were some very concrete insights. We thank you and we appreciate the fact that you are fighting jet lag right now, straight from New York. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And it's great to see that implementation is already beginning to take shape, particularly, as you mentioned, around the area-based management tools and the role of early coalitions. So thank you very much for that engaging presentation. Next, I unfortunately have to present the apologies of Liliana Rodriguez Cortez, who was indisposed today and could not join us. But we are happy to report that she's drafting an article with her experience in New York, and that will be shared in our next IOI Informa. We're going to leave you the link in the chat, and if you are following us, you will find her article over there. If you're not following us, you can register for the IOI Informa right now. So with that being said, we now turn to Katie Mitchell. Katie is a policy analyst at the Global Ocean Forum, where she works on ocean governance and capacity development, including through the Common Oceans cross-sectoral project. Building on the discussion so far, Katie will bring a fresh angle, a more practical one, with her on-the-ground perspective. We will be looking at how capacity building and cross-sectoral cooperation are being developed in regions such as the South Pacific and Pacific Islands. Thank you very much, Katie, for being here with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cosmin, and thank you, Antonella, for having me today. And I also want to acknowledge and thank the Early Career Ocean Professionals Program, which connected me with IOI. And are you able to see my slides? Yes, okay, thank you. As Cosmin mentioned, today I'll be providing some practical examples on building capacity for cross-sectoral ABNJ management through our Common Oceans cross-sectoral project. This project is funded by the Global Environment Facility and it falls under the Common Oceans Program, which is coordinated by FAO. And to start, I want to focus on the two overarching aims of this project. The first is to strengthen capacity for sectoral and cross-sectoral cooperation and coordination in marine areas beyond national jurisdiction. And this will mainly be accomplished through the development of a capacity building program targeted towards national representatives. And the second aim of this project is to work with partners in the Southeast Pacific and Pacific Islands pilot regions to try and improve overall understanding of ABNJ issues and governance. And while our project was developed before the BBNJ agreement entered into force, one of the ways we're working to improve understanding of ABNJ issues and governance is to increase understanding of the BBNJ agreement as it moves towards implementation. And so while we're working broadly with ABNJ management, many of the initiatives of our project and the work we're doing is closely aligned with the core pillars of the BBNJ agreement. And these two aims form the main components that are the structure of the activities of the cross-sectoral project, with component one focusing on capacity building through the development of a training program, and component two focusing on improving knowledge about ABNJ issues and governance. In today's presentation, I'm going to be focusing on some practical examples from component one around capacity building. And the scope of our project is focused on two pilot regions. In the Pacific Islands, we're working with 14 Pacific Islands Forum member countries. And in the Southeast Pacific, we're working with 4 member countries of the Permanent Commission for the South Pacific. We're also monitoring and collaborating with the remit and the work of 7 regional bodies, which are outlined on the slide here, that are actively involved in ABNJ activities in both of these pilot regions. Want to first, before we jump into some of the practical examples, acknowledge our project partners who are key to making sure this project can move forward. It's a global alliance under the Common Oceans Program coordinated by FAO, implemented by the UN Environment Program. The Global Ocean Forum, where I am a policy analyst, is the executing agency for the project. We have 6 co-executing partners working at global and regional levels that form our project team. We're also supported by 22 co-financing partners working at global and regional levels within the ABNJ space, providing additional expertise and guidance to the project. We're very grateful for that partnership and support. So moving forward to the examples we'll be focusing on today, we're going to focus on the capacity building program that is currently under development, which started with a capacity needs assessment. And so first I will focus on our capacity needs assessment. This formed a foundational analysis that will go into directly and inform our capacity building program. And this capacity needs assessment was conducted in each of our 2 pilot regions, the Southeast Pacific and the Pacific Islands. The Southeast Pacific, our regional partner, the Universidad Católica del Norte in Chile, led this assessment with support from the Global Ocean Forum and the Permanent Commission of the Southeast Pacific. And in the Pacific Islands, the University of the South Pacific led this activity with facilitation by the Office of the Pacific Ocean Commissioner and the Global Ocean Forum. This assessment was a 4-part assessment that was the initial results of which have just been finalized in 2026. The first part of this assessment was a preliminary analysis, and this was conducted to get a baseline understanding of the current capacity for ABNJ governance and management of the countries in our 2 pilot regions. And so for this baseline assessment, we developed national ABNJ profiles for each of our target countries, so 18 profiles total, outlining the current governance frameworks, key stakeholders and policies, current knowledge and resources related to ABNJ management. This forms the basic understanding for our project and also served as a valuable resource for our stakeholders who we're working with in the pilot regions to understand the current status of ABNJ management and governance in these regions and potential gaps that could be addressed through a training program. Once that preliminary analysis was conducted, we conducted simultaneously a job analysis and a population analysis. The job analysis was to understand and define key skills, knowledge, and attitudes that are critical for ABNJ governance and specifically cross-sectoral ABNJ governance. And this is based on interviews with stakeholders in our pilot regions to understand the priorities they have and would understand for ABNJ management so that we could develop an ideal capacity to move towards that we could develop with our training program. For the population analysis, we're assessing the target population, so national representatives in our pilot countries, to understand their preferred learning modes and what would most benefit them for this training program that we are developing to ensure that it can meet our stakeholder needs, meet them in the way that is most accessible and convenient for them. Finally, after conducting these 3 analyses, we held validation workshops virtually in each of our pilot regions. These were held in March of 2026. And during these workshops, we presented the preliminary results of the 3 analyses that we have conducted as the overall capacity needs assessment for feedback by our stakeholders and validation to ensure that the conclusions that we're drawing from this capacity needs assessment are reflecting the needs and the interests of our stakeholders. And I've mentioned stakeholders quite a bit, and I want to emphasize that throughout our project and specifically throughout the activities I'm discussing, stakeholder engagement really is the critical piece of what we're doing and what I'll focus on today. And that stakeholder engagement and their involvement in the capacity needs assessment and later activities of the project will form the basis of our engagement and our training program going forward. So we really value that input from our stakeholders, and that is the focus of all of our project efforts moving forward. The results of this capacity needs assessment are now being fed into the development of our training program. And this training program will run through 2028. So it will be a longer process in collaboration with our project partners and stakeholders. The development will continue through the end of 2026. We're now focusing on curriculum design, and we'll move towards implementation at the end of this year through early 2027. And part of the training program implementation, I want to focus on our working group process. This will form the practicum for our training program participants. So as they're participating in the training program, which will include 5 virtual sessions and an in-person workshop, they will also be participating in a working group process to start to identify and develop collaborative mechanisms for ABNJ governance and management within their regions and within their work. And then the conclusion of that working group process will conclude with an identified mechanism that could be then implemented or adopted in the pilot regions following the conclusion of our project. And throughout this process, we will be working closely with our stakeholders, and their input and their guidance will be informing this training program and how we implement it moving forward. For the remainder of this presentation, I'm going to provide some more practical examples of our stakeholder engagement and how we got this organized during our capacity needs assessment, and particularly how this was related to the BBNJ agreement and related meetings. To start with the identification of our targeted stakeholders, we worked with our project partners to start to come up with stakeholders in our 18 target countries, 14 in the Pacific Islands, and 4 in the Southeast Pacific, particularly among national ministries that are relevant or involved in work or have mandates relevant to ABNJ management and governance. We also expanded that to identify regional bodies operating in the high seas that are critical to ABNJ government and management, some of them operating with existing frameworks in the ABNJ space to get their involvement and understand the existing work happening in ABNJ, and have also identified 3 global bodies similarly involved in influencing management and governance in ABNJ spaces. We also have identified stakeholders from civil society, and these have been critical to support the capacity needs assessment and also will support the development and implementation of this training program that we're building, in particular input from Indigenous peoples, from academia, and other NGOs working in this ABNJ space. Once we identified those targeted stakeholders, we came up with a capacity needs assessment strategy for stakeholder engagement. Our project is informed by an overall stakeholder engagement plan, and we then tailored this specifically for the capacity needs assessment, where we decided to employ a snowball strategy to start with those targeted stakeholders we felt were directly relevant or maybe interested in providing input to the project, and then from there take their recommendations for additional participants or additional stakeholders to build out from those initial targeted stakeholders that we first approached. And in this way, we are able to defer to national and regional expertise and knowledge and learn from the work that is already happening on the ground in these regions to ensure that the activities and the outputs that we're developing are reflective of the needs of the region and the national level as well. And as we continue with this engagement, we work to empower project partners to help amplify our project activities as well. So for example, on the slide here, I have 2 photos of our project partners who have attended regional meetings related to the management and governance of high seas, who are able to share the work that we're doing with our project to potentially stakeholders that had not previously been involved in our work. So even in these early stages of the project, we're already able to amplify the work and connect with practitioners who can potentially benefit from the programs that we're developing. And a critical piece of this engagement is connecting to build trust and collaboration. As we move forward with this training program, we need to build that trust with our stakeholders, many of whom are already very overburdened and have many different projects and partnerships that they're working with. So building that connection and trust with them is key to getting their engagement, which is the foundation of all of the activities of our project. Because this project is working with a global team of partners and working across very geographically dispersed regions, we started with initial virtual connections with stakeholders and then supplemented that with opportunities for in-person engagement. And while it is a valuable tool to have that initial virtual connection, we found that that in-person connection really can't be replaced. But having that initial virtual contact and awareness helps to maximize what you can do during the limited in-person time that you have. And something that we've done as a project, as we're moving forward with our stakeholder engagement, is to strategically select workshops, events, and conferences where there are relevant practitioners and issues related to ABNJ governance being discussed. So this is not an exhaustive list here, but we've participated in some of the events listed, such as International Waters Conferences, regional BBNJ workshops, the 3rd UN Ocean Conference, and participation in all 3 sessions of the BBNJ Preparatory Commission. And for the rest of the presentation, I'll focus on our stakeholder engagement through the BBNJ Preparatory Commission. So at PrepCom 1, we were focused on the initial engagement with our stakeholders. And ahead of this PrepCom, we had already started our capacity needs assessment activities and were able to prepare information packets to distribute to our national target representatives in our 18 target countries that showed some of the initial results of the preliminary analysis, particularly the national ABNJ profiles that we're developing. And this was a way to connect with stakeholders and to share resources that we're developing that could benefit them, and also a chance for us to get their further input into those profiles if we hadn't already been able to get their input, to ensure that those profiles were actually reflective of the national situations. From those national profiles, we also conducted and developed a regional profile for each of our pilot regions, reflecting the work at the regional level in the BBNJ space. Something that we worked on in particular for this PrepCom was trying to distill the messages of our project so that it could be easily digestible and understood by our stakeholders. So in this, we developed a one-pager project fact sheet in English and Spanish, as well as some flowcharts and overview of key project activities, particularly when our stakeholders have a limited attention span or at a meeting such as PrepCom, where there is a lot going on and people have many priorities. Being able to have a distilled message and maximize the time that you have was really critical in establishing those connections with our stakeholders and getting them on board to support and participate in our project. Moving forward to PrepCom 2, this was an opportunity to solidify those stakeholder connections and continue to pursue that snowball strategy of engagement. So at the PrepCom 2, we were able to co-organize an official side event looking at efforts and challenges for ratification and implementation of the BBNJ Agreement in partnership with the World Maritime University. And this was a great opportunity for our project partners at the regional level to present and demonstrate the work that they're doing through this project and the engagement that we've had so far, and the initial results of the capacity needs assessment, which were not yet finalized at that point. This was also an opportunity to then recruit additional input and conduct interviews with stakeholders and really make sure that we are gaining that valuable input to the project to inform our activities. So throughout and in between the PrepComs, that stakeholder engagement is a continuous piece. And this in-person connection is really solidifying that work that we have done to make sure that we are meeting and understanding the needs of our stakeholders. Finally, at PrepCom 3 was the start of convening our working groups and following some key issues that were being discussed at PrepCom that were also quite relevant to our project, and presenting our preliminary results of the capacity needs assessment. So at the PrepCom 3, we were able to convene a meeting of our regional BBNJ working groups. So alongside this process, we have worked with our regional partners in both of our pilot regions to establish working groups in each region. In the Pacific Islands, that working group is coordinated and led by the Office of the Pacific Ocean Commissioner. And in the Southeast Pacific, that working group is led and coordinated by the Permanent Commission of the South Pacific with leadership from Chile. And this was an opportunity to bring stakeholders from both of our pilot regions together to exchange ideas and get additional validation on the results of our capacity needs assessment following the validation workshops that were held virtually in March. And then to also get their input on the preliminary outline for the modules of our training program, which is now moving towards implementation. And that feedback was critical to establishing those working groups and building a relation among potential training program participants and stakeholders moving forward, and also an opportunity to follow along with the key issues being discussed at PrepCom 3 that will have direct implications for the high seas management that we're working to support across sectors. So looking forward to what is next, we will be moving forward with the development and implementation of our training program, as I've mentioned. We're now in the phase of the curriculum design and module development for this program, which will be and continue to be informed by our capacity needs assessment. We will continue to receive input in this period as well. It's never too late to have insight or feedback from our stakeholders and project partners. This is very much a co-design process and will be interactive throughout the duration of this program. We will start the implementation of this program in October with 5 virtual training sessions that will be conducted from October to June of 2027. And then we will organize an in-person workshop in each pilot region, which will be an opportunity for our participants to come together and meet in person after these virtual sessions. And the idea is to have this in-person workshop following COP1 of the BBNJ agreement to potentially, which will having that following COP1 will allow us to better understand some of the provisions of that agreement that are yet to be decided. So following those COP decisions, it will be important to have that in-person regional workshops that our stakeholders have a chance to dialogue and understand how they can move forward with implementation once we have that final guidance from COP1. Thank you for your time and attention today. If you're interested in learning more about the project or our ongoing work, please reach out to myself or Miriam Balgos. Miriam Balgos is our project manager and capacity development specialist. And the two of us form the project management unit for the cross-sectoral project, and we'll be welcome and open to any input or ideas that you may have as we move forward with our capacity building program development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie, for bringing those very practical insights and grounding the discussion in basically in real-world implementation, what we are all after at this stage. And thank you very much for touching particularly on topics around capacity building as well. I think if we take a step back, what we've heard today is a very clear progression from the evolving institutional architecture as detailed by Daniel to how states and coalitions are beginning to operationalize key elements of the agreement, and finally, how these efforts are unfolding in practice across different regions. What also comes through strongly is that implementation will depend not just on formal mechanism, but on cooperation, trust building, and basically the ability to translate global commitments into locally meaningful action. Thank you very much to all our speakers today. And with that, we now open the floor for discussion. I would like to, first of all, ask, I know that Daniel has some timing limitations on his sides. If there are any direct questions which would benefit from Daniel's expertise, please raise your hand or write it now in the chat or in the Q&A. Okay, thank you very much. Daniel, please go ahead.
Thank you, Cosmin. And indeed, I will have to leave soon. I saw one really interesting question in the chat by Vanessa Castello on the future or potential coordination between BBNJ and ISA. And I thought that I could take a first stab at this. And then maybe Klaudija or Katie also want to supplement my response. Is that okay? I see nodding.
Please.
Okay, great. So I think, as Klaudija said, PrepCom only makes recommendations to COP. It does not by itself, at least for the institutional setup, make final decisions. And the main guiding principles legally are what is in the treaty. So you have the balance between Article 5.2, which is not undermine relevant instruments, frameworks, and bodies. But then there is also an obligation on parties that are parties to relevant instruments, frameworks, and bodies, so other bodies like the ISA, to promote the objectives of the BBNJ agreement as appropriate in decision-making in those fora. So that's, I think, the starting point to look at interactions between regimes in the context of BBNJ. it's also worth noting that many parts of the BBNJ agreement go into a lot more detail in terms of how that interaction works. So for example, relevant in the context of ISA is the environmental impact assessment section, which in article, I believe, I don't have my text in front of me right now. I think it's article 29.4 that specifies when a party can choose to use an environmental impact assessment or similar process under an existing body. So for example, ISA, it can't just do that without looking closely. There are two tests. There's one test that is that the environmental impact assessment has to be done in a I'm lacking the word right now, but in the same level of quality, or the process has to be designed so it doesn't meet the BBNJ thresholds. So I think those are the starting points from the BBNJ side to look at how interaction works in practice. And it's important, as we know, to integrate obligations under international law. So if a party is a party to the ISA and a party to BBNJ, they need to integrate their obligations. And at least in the context of EIAs, there are specific provisions of how to do that. Now, looking at PrepCom, as I mentioned earlier, parties did decide in the organizational meeting that they want to look at cooperation with relevant instruments and frameworks and bodies as one of the elements on the PrepCom's mandate, and they developed a draft decision on this. The final text isn't out yet. The draft decision going into PrepCom 2 was at a level of principle, so just soft law, so guidance by the COP on what principles to employ in shaping that relationship. And it had a few specific modalities led by the Secretariat in the form of a task force and a workshop. I believe the task force is definitely gone because it was felt that it was too restrictive. I would have to double check if the workshop is still in there, but essentially, I think it's fair to say that the main starting point is still the BBNJ agreement text, and that if COP1 adopts the draft decision that PrepCom developed, it will only be some additional soft law guidance. I hope that's helpful. And Claudia and Katie, please feel free to compliment me. And I might have to step off in 5 minutes. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much, Daniel. We appreciate your insights. Please, Claudia and Katie, if you have anything to add. If not, we're going to take more questions.
Maybe I can just quickly say I put the text that Daniel talked about in the chat if you guys are interested to have a look. And as Daniel said, we don't have the final text yet, so since it's quite early in the process or just after the PrepCom. Yeah, I think maybe just to complement from a more perspective from being in the room, what was very interesting to see is that there were a lot of sectoral and regional organizations that were present during this PrepCom. I think there was really a record number of RFMOs that were present in the room. We also had the ISA represented, the IMO, the CBD. So I think that is quite interesting at this part of the process, just before the first COP, that all the existing organizations are also trying to evaluate what the impact is of the BBNJ agreement on their mandates.
Thank you very much, Claudia. So, Katie, would you like to add anything else to that?
No, I think Claudia and Daniel have covered that. Thank you.
Perfect. So we're going to take our next question. Unfortunately, quite a few came at the same time. You'll have to excuse me if I'm not following the right order, but I'm seeing a very good question here from Daniela Borden. Any ideas of further research that could be important, especially evaluating its implementation against commercial activities such as offshore operations for oil and gas, mining, and shipping? I don't know, Daniel, if you still have time for this question, or if Klaudija, I think this is right up your alley as well.
Go ahead, Klaudija.
Well, I think it's a very good question in terms of further research, and I think there's many elements of the BBNJ agreement that would require further research, and don't hesitate to contact us as well if you have any ideas. We can point you to some interesting scientists as well who are working on these topics. I think the EIA section is not talked about enough probably in terms of the BBNJ agreement. We talk a lot about ABMTs and MGRs, but in terms of environmental impact assessments, there's a lot of novel activities that are happening on the high seas that are currently also not regulated, such as aquaculture on vessels as well on the high seas, or there's a topic of marine carbon dioxide removal. So I think all these new activities, they could really benefit from additional research, and as well how the BBNJ agreement will impact these activities.
Thank you, Klaudija. Actually, I'm seeing another question from Carlos, just to continue in the same line. Are there strategies to prevent global corporations from exploiting the BBNJ framework in order to evade environmental impact assessments? I don't know if you would be able to add just a little bit more on this as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether there are any specific strategies. I haven't thought about this like in this way. I would say that the BBNJ agreement provides a minimum standard of environmental impact assessments, especially in cases where there are currently no or barely minimum rules regarding environmental impact assessments. Of course, what's one of the downsides of the BBNJ agreement is that it's up to states in the end to decide whether the activities meet the requirements of the BBNJ agreement or the national or regional sectoral EIA requirements. So yeah, I'm not really sure what to answer, but I think more transparency and reporting could help also expose certain situations where, for example, a state makes an evaluation that a certain activity meets the EIA requirements, but in the end, yeah, there could be a difference of interpretation, for example. So I think the scientific and technical body as well of the BBNJ agreement could play a role here to provide scientific advice or technical advice regarding some of these new activities, and as well regarding the quality of environmental impact assessments.
Thank you very much. I've seen, Katie, I think this question was for you. Basically, it mentioned that it was from Patrice, who mentioned that Kenya is developing a blue carbon ecosystem national plan, determined contribution, implementation plan, sorry. And how can the BBNJ benefit sharing framework for marine genetic resources be practically integrated with the national community development agreements in order to ensure coastal communities benefit from high areas scientific discoveries?
That is a great question. Thank you for that. And also congratulations on the work that is being done in Kenya there. In terms of the practical implementation, would you mind sharing the question one more time so that I can review that?
Of course, I'll share it this very second. I will copy and paste it right into the chat, okay?
Thank you.
It should be the last one. Done.
Thanks. Okay. In terms of the implementation with national community development agreements, I think this is something that actors that are working in the BBNJ space can support. We've seen with the work that we're doing in our 2 pilot regions in the Southeast Pacific and the Pacific Islands that regional coordination can also be very beneficial to support integration of programs at the national level. And so leaning on the expertise and the wider expertise that may be available at regional or global levels can then be very beneficial to help guide integration to the national level. And I hope that this process would be similarly reflected through what we'll develop through the BBNJ benefit sharing framework.
Thank you very much, Katie. Also, we noticed that you mentioned some great resources that you created in the past few years. I'm pretty sure people would love to see them. I don't know if you can drop a link or something in the chat, if that's accessible and free, of course.
Yes, I'd be happy to share a link to our project page, which I'll put in the chat shortly, which is where we have the most up-to-date information. At this point, we have not publicly released many of the resources that we've been developing because we're developing them and co-designing them with our national partners. So once we have the final validation from our national representatives and those that have provided input to the activities of the capacity needs assessment, we will then be able to share those outputs. One key action that key activity that may be relevant that I hadn't mentioned in my presentation is an e-learning course on ABNJ that will be launching this year, hopefully in the coming months. And that will be a practical resource open to anyone. It will first launch in English and then will be shared in Spanish and will be a overview of the marine areas beyond national jurisdiction and some of the overarching governance strategies and frameworks. So all of that will be made available through our project website as soon as they are ready to be shared. So please stay tuned there as those resources become more publicly available.
Lovely, thank you. We're looking forward to that as well. And now I'm seeing another great question. Any financial bodies, opportunities to support activities related to BBNJ capacity building or research in developing nations such as the FAO, GEF, BBNJ, enabling activities and projects? I think, Katie, this refers mostly to you because you have experience in this, but Klaudija, please feel free to add as well.
And
I just copy-pasted it now again, okay?
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I think my computer has frozen for a moment. Okay. There are many opportunities to and growing financial bodies that are there to support capacity building, particularly as we move towards implementation. The example given, the FAO GEF BBNJ Enabling Activities Project is a great resource for countries at the national level. Those are funds that are available that countries can apply to, and those funds go directly towards support for ratification and implementation. And to my knowledge, that project is still open and it is still possible for countries to apply to receive that funding and that support. There also will be some new projects coming down the pipeline, and the Global Ocean Forum will be involved in a project that just had its inception workshop during the BBNJ PrepCom 3. And under that project, it will be expanding some of the capacity building efforts that have been developing as the BBNJ agreement was moving towards ratification and implementation, and trying to look at those from the global level. So as I've discussed the cross-sectoral project, it's really a pilot project that is focused specifically on 2 regions. And this upcoming project will be focused on developing capacity at the global level. And then under that project, it will be developing training programs and resources to support practitioners in the ABNJ space. And there will be some opportunities for funding through that project to participate in training and in resource development to support the national and regional and global level capacity building for ABNJ governance across sectors. So that project will be an effort that will be led by the UNDP, UNEP, and FAO, and that has just launched, so there will be more details coming for that. But that is another potential opportunity for some resources for capacity building and funding.
Thank you very much, Katie. I have an interesting question here from Ebrima. What legal and governance issues arise under BBNJ when a company wants to conduct research at high sea and commercialize the findings? Klaudija, do you think you could take this question?
It's quite a broad question. I actually had some more responses regarding the previous question that could be of interest.
Sure, please go ahead.
Yep. Maybe to start with that first. So regarding opportunities in developing countries, I think the IKI Living High Seas project is very interesting. I'll just post a link in the chat. So here there are opportunities for developing countries to participate because the objective is to engage with Ecuador, Chile, Brazil, Senegal, Indonesia, and Micronesia to help develop high seas MPA proposals. And there's also, so the EU has also provided funding for the implementation of the BBNJ Agreement. And so IUCN is hosting a technical assistance facility. And so states can, for example, ask any support, technical support to experts, or there will be some kind of matchmaking that will happen. And this can also help developing countries with capacity building. For the other question, I'm thinking how to respond because I'm not the MGR expert, but so to say, the BBNJ agreement actually aims to respond to some of the challenges regarding marine genetic resources. So without the BBNJ agreement, we had more of a first come, first serve system with marine genetic resources. So if you look at the countries that have the intellectual property rights of marine genetic resources, there are 3 countries that have 70% of the intellectual property rights. And also we've had a system where there were many Western researchers that were going also to the high seas and having access to research and marine genetic resources, whereas for developing countries this was more challenging. So the BBNJ agreement provides modalities for monetary and non-monetary benefit sharing. So the monetary benefit sharing is basically the financial rewards that come from this marine genetic resource development will be used for the implementation of the BBNJ agreement and will specifically be used for implementation of the to help developing countries with implementation. And then the non-monetary benefits is also regarding the sharing of research and information and capacity building. So yeah, we're actually pretty hopeful that the BBNJ agreement helps to address these questions regarding marine genetic resources.
Thank you very much. I'm still seeing some wonderful questions in the chat. Unfortunately, we're a little bit low on time, so I'm going to be the tyrannical moderator and ask my own question at the end, okay? If you had to identify one priority action that should happen before COP1 in order to ensure meaningful implementation of the BBNJ agreement, what would that one single action be? I think this is the golden question after today's webinar. Katie, would you like to go first? What do you think would be the biggest priority before COP1?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that one. I think as we've heard in some of the discussions today, there has been, well, there's a lot of enthusiasm and support for the BBNJ agreement following the 3 preparatory commissions, the 3 meetings of the preparatory commission. There still is a lot left on the table to be discussed, and there's a lot of uncertainty around how this agreement will actually look when it comes to implementation. So I think if I could pick a critical action before COP1, it would be I think there's a lot of interest around the clearinghouse mechanism and what that can offer as a tool for, particularly as people are trying to navigate the complexities of this agreement. So any action towards moving towards some more concrete progress for the clearinghouse mechanism and getting that tool towards development and resources available for practitioners as soon as possible could really help to streamline things moving forward and give us a chance to hit COP1 with the ground running, so that once we're there, we can maximize the discussion and hopefully start moving towards some concrete actions. Because there's a lot of goodwill, a lot of ideas, and a lot of enthusiasm for the agreement right now. So moving towards tools to support the development of those actual actions would be great before COP1 if we could make that happen.
Lovely, thank you. Klaudija, what would be your priority action before COP1 in your view?
In my view, I think it's important to deblock the discussions on the scientific and technical body and to maybe already start thinking about the membership of the scientific and technical body, and to make sure that it's operationalized as soon as possible, because it's one of the key bodies of the BBNJ agreement that touches on all 4 parts of all chapters and also cross-cutting issues. And we really need the scientific and technical expertise to be ready also for the implementation of the BBNJ agreement.
Thank you very much. I think it's quite clear that implementation is no longer a distant phase. It's already underway, and the coming months will be critical in shaping how this new system takes form in practice. Thank you so much for your excellent presentations. I would also like to remind everyone that on behalf of the IOI, Liliana will participate in the upcoming meetings and conferences on BBNJ. So do continue to read the IOI Informa, and we'll be posting things on social media as well. Thank you so much. I think with this we can draw today's webinar to a close. The next one will be in 3 months' time, and hopefully the topic will be just as engaging. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the day or evening or night. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for
Thank you so
being here,
much.
and a big thank you to our speakers for sharing their expertise as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't forget that the videos
Thank you,
will be
everyone.
available from the IOI Alumni website in a couple of days' time.
Yes.
You can see the meeting all over again if you wish. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks, Klaudija. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Antonella.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Cosmin.
Thanks, Intel and Cosmin. Thank you all.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.